guys, Stefan here. Welcome to episode 19. And today I just wanted to give you a little bit more of an idea of where I'm coming from as a gamer, how I grew up and got into video games, what systems I've owned, that type of thing. Really kind of give you a better idea of what sort of formed my collection, what formed my ideas of what games that I love, and where I'm going from here. To start, as a really young kid, I actually didn't grow up with a console. I grew up more with an old Power Mac and a little bit later on a PC. Being born in 1987, I missed out, of course, on obviously all the Gen 1 and 2 stuff anyway to begin with. But the first game I remember playing, like really have like a solid memory of playing, is Star Trek 25th Anniversary. That was a very great point-and-click adventure that was originally good old floppy disk, DOS and Mac game that eventually ended up getting the CD version of, going on to play things like all the LucasArts games. And as a kid, it really was the realm of the old Power Mac down in our basement in our first house and playing a lot of DOS stuff over at friends' houses. I remember going down to my friend Matt's house. He used to have a PC in his basement, and his dad had a bunch of old floppy disk LucasArts games, things like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis and that kind of stuff. I remember getting into a lot of that sort of through him a little bit more. And that was really what made me a gamer up until the release of the PlayStation 1. Between the time I was born and the time I got a PS1, the only other systems I had, I actually got both in one summer. And before I got those systems, console gaming to me was something that I would occasionally do at a friend's house. I mean, I kind of watched friends play a lot of games, parts of Final Fantasy 4 and 6. I had a save file at a friend's house for Chrono Trigger because I actually really kind of got into that. But I always sort of saw it as the little brother of my like Mac gaming at the time when I was a kid. I just really couldn't get into it. It really wasn't at a point where I was really into console gaming. I had plenty of stuff that I was into already on my PC, and being a kid, you can't afford a lot of games anyway, so I was sort of of the opinion, well, I'd rather sort of save my pennies and buy a couple of Mac or PC games rather than save up to get a console. And that summer, though, I can't remember exactly what summer it was. I want to say it was probably summer '94, because I know it was before the PS1 launched, but it was a point where we already kind of knew what it was going to be, so I'm assuming summer '94 kind of sounds right in there. And it was actually yard sale finds. I used to go yard selling with my mom all the time during the summer. When I was little, I used to have like my little fanny pack with all my allowance in and things like that, and go around and look for action figures and maybe some games. And she came home one day. I don't remember why I didn't go with her this time, but she came home one day after yard selling and brought home an NES. And it was a complete system. It had 2 controllers, it had the light gun, and had maybe like 5 games with it. And that was my first console, was the NES, all the way, in '94. A little bit behind in times there, but for me, having not owned a console before, didn't really matter. I still enjoyed it. I mean, I had Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt, Super Mario Brothers 2 and 3, Legend of Zelda, and actually a complete in-box Final Fantasy. That was really cool. The box was in good shape. It had the map and like the manual, like everything. It was a complete Final Fantasy, and that was really my first experience with playing through a Final Fantasy, a console-style RPG on my own, not just sort of watching a friend do it. And I really, really enjoyed the NES, but at the time, it was well past the time of the NES, and I really didn't know of any retro game stores around me, and there were, I think, 1 or 2 around me at the time, but I didn't know about them, and we didn't have the internet or anything, so that was kind of my, entire experience. It was limited to those handful of games that we got with the system. I never really played anything else from that system for many, many years. And then that same summer, towards the end of the summer, I had gone through that whole summer, hardly got anything at yard sales. For some reason, it was just an unusually bad yard sale season, I remember. And I just had all this money I'd saved up for the summer left over. And right before school started, I really think it was no more than like a week or 2 before school started, actually. I remember not having much time to play it. I found at another yard sale a complete Sega Genesis. So it was a Model 2 Genesis with 2 controllers, and again, just sort of 4 or 5 games, but I got lucky again, the same thing with the NES. Some of those games were things like Sonic. I got Shining Force 1 and 2, Phantasy Star 4. I mean, it was just a really good collection of Genesis games, but just a handful of games, in the same situation where I didn't know of any retro stuff, so that was all I played on the Genesis then for many, many years. And that was sort of, for me, I thought, kind of the end of console gaming. I was going on to playing things like Warcraft and waiting for like StarCraft to come out. I remember seeing like the original footage when it was basically Warcraft in space, and playing Dungeon Keeper and Myth of the Fallen Lords, and just getting more and more into the Windows era of gaming, and just sort of being happy with my two little consoles with like 10 games between them. And that's kind of came to an end when my friend Zach got a PS1. Before then, like I said, console gaming didn't really appeal to me that much. It was something that was an occasional fun pastime, but it wasn't the core of my gaming experience. But when my friend Zach got his PS1, I remember going down to his basement and playing. I played a couple games, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Consoles are kind of, there's a little more potential there than I originally thought. And what really made me decide I want this console was when he put in Bushido Blade. And I loved it. To this day, the first Bushido Blade is my favorite fighting game of all time, and Bushido Blade 2 is my second favorite fighting game of all time. Never played any other game like them with that sense of just skill and realism, and just fantastic. Absolutely love them. To this day, I feel like you could pop it in and it's more fun than most PS3 or PS4 fighting games. They're fantastic, and I don't understand why there's not a third one. But that's a different story. I wanted that game. That was sort of the end-all be-all. Like, I had to have that game, and it really made me think, like, wow, if this is that great, and this system is fairly new, where's gaming going? Like, could console gaming be something I can get into? And I ended up saving up my money, and along the way, I even before I had the system, I bought a game just because I happened to see it really cheap. I think at the mall somewhere. It was Battle Arena Toshinden. That was my first game, PS1 game ever. My first like real console game purchase from a store. And I still had that, and I was waiting, and it was getting close to Christmas, and I'm like, PS1 is a little too expensive to ask for Christmas, and I only have this one game, and it almost felt like a bit of a pipe dream. But that was at a time where my grandparents in Germany would send my sister and myself a little bit of money for Christmas every year. So I'd saved up some on my own, got some money from Christmas, and there were after Christmas sales coming, and I knew that I had just enough to afford the system. Couldn't get a memory card, couldn't get anything. I was like, alright, I can do this, and like wait till my birthday and just play, Battle Arena Toshinden, and like maybe save my pennies for Bushido Blade. Like that would be about it. But then I decided to ask my little sister if she wanted a PS1. And it was one of those just sort of like, well, do you want to go in on this with me? Are there the games that you want? Like if not, I'm just going to wait, and I'm going to wait till my birthday to get it. But she ended up saying, oh yeah, she really liked it too. This was after she had grown up playing a lot of, especially like Mario and things like that. And so between the two of us, we were able to get our PS1 and a couple games. I picked up Bushido Blade, and she picked up like Croc Legend of the Gabos and a couple like Mary-Kate and Ashley or Disney games and things like that. And for Christmas that year, when I got my PS1, my sister also got me Final Fantasy VII. That was, right pretty much after it came out. She got me Final Fantasy VII with some help from my mom as a Christmas gift. And that really blew me away. It was something where, to this day, Final Fantasy VII is definitely not my favorite Final Fantasy. Maybe in my top 5 Final Fantasies, definitely, but definitely not my favorite. But it will always be the most nostalgic for me, even though it's not the first one I played, obviously. But it's the game that, for me, Bushido Blade drew me into the idea of wanting to own a console and getting into console gaming. Final Fantasy VII is what turned me into a console gamer. Final Fantasy VII just drew me away from my PC so much, and I loved it. And you got the old strategy guide, the official strategy guide, the one before it had that million sold logo on it, and just playing through it forever and talking to friends, playing through it. My friend like Patrick was playing it, and a couple other guys, and it was just such a great time. And I'd never really experienced anything like that because I'd never really owned an RPG that big before on a console. It was always just at a friend's place. So that got me more and more into looking into PS1 games and buying them. And I kind of slowly started to ignore my PC to the point where the last PC game I ever bought, as far as its release date, was the Frozen Throne expansion to Warcraft 3. Since then, I have not gotten into PC gaming at all. Like, that was sort of like the end for me. I loved the old 90s PC gaming, and then that died. I was console only, and I've been console only to this day. And you can blame PS1 for that. So I had the PS1. I was playing that. I eventually saved up and found an N64, amazingly again, at a yard sale. I remember I got my N64 complete with a controller and a couple games, and I didn't really get into the N64 too much. We played a lot at friends' houses, but even to this day, I've never been a big Nintendo guy. I'm not really big on Nintendo franchises, so the N64 didn't really have a lot to offer me, besides a few great multiplayer experiences and a few of those just sort of must-have titles, things like Pokemon Stadium, Pokemon Snap, Mario 64, that kind of stuff. Like maybe a dozen titles I had for it, but other than that, I was just an RPG and fighting game addict. So it was PS1 all the way, and I never got a Saturn because by the time I got my PS1, obviously it was Christmas, '97. So Saturn had pretty much kind of come and went already in the States, and I'd never even seen one in person for many years. It was way after that where I saw one for the first time. The only exception was I'm pretty sure my friend Patrick's dad had one. I want to say, I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty certain I remember his dad having one, upstairs, a little TV in their bedroom, second floor. I might be wrong about that, but I feel like he had a Saturn. So, yeah, that was about it until eventually the announcement of the PlayStation 2. And before that, I'd actually been looking through a lot of magazines about the Dreamcast. I remember I went to visit my friend Zach in Arizona, and he had a couple cool gaming magazines, and they had some ads for Dreamcast stuff, and I was really seriously considering getting a Dreamcast instead of a PS2, but I just had such a mountain of PlayStation 1 games and such a love for that console that I decided to wait and save my money. I know I probably couldn't afford both of them right away, and I was going to wait to get the PlayStation 2, and it was the spring of 2001. So the PS2 came out here in North America in 2000, and spring of 2001 I had a big birthday party where my mom let me go to the local Blockbuster, and we rented a PlayStation 2 and a whole bunch of games, half the launch lineup plus others, and I also got the Bouncer for my birthday. And I stayed up for almost 48 hours, I think, just playing PS2, and overheated the thing, and just nonstop. We stayed up all night, and then I just kept going the next day after they went home, and just plowing through PS2 games over and over again, and just being floored by the thing, absolutely loving it. It's probably my favorite gaming memory, actually, is just renting that PlayStation 2 and just playing things nonstop. Eternal Ring, Evergrace, Tekken Tag Tournament, Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore, the first SSX, Dynasty Warriors 2, Armored Core 2, the Bouncer, just plowing through all those games and playing just non-stop and having so much fun. And so, but then I had to give it back, and I was stuck there I had the Bouncer, and I had a memory card with a bunch of saves from all those games I was playing over that long weekend for my birthday party, and I didn't have enough money to actually buy one at the time, so it was sort of I got this huge experience, this surge, this rush of PS2, and then it was taken away from me, and I saved up, and by the end of that summer I was able to finally get myself a PS2, and it was sort of no looking back. No matter how, even to this day, no matter how many other systems I get, no matter how many I want, the PS2 always holds a special place in my heart just because of that experience, and then the massive library. I mean, it is the biggest console library of all time, especially if you get into regional exclusives. It's just, even if the hardware itself is not my favorite, which is definitely not my favorite hardware wise or company wise or in a lot of respects, but it's endless. That's the only console where, in making my sort of wish list of games that I want, where I really, really had to limit myself because there are just too many games. I could very easily just own a PS2 and only collect PS1 and PS2 games and be good for the rest of my life. But you'd miss out on way too much other stuff in doing that. So it's really the kind of console where even looking at cheap games, it kind of have to be kind of want it, but oh man, I can't have everything PS2. There's too much. And right after that was when I really got my first job, where I was working all summer. My first actual steady job at a grocery store, not just chores or anything like that, or working for an uncle or something, and working weekends during school, and that way I had a little bit more spending money. So eventually, right after that, pretty much that following spring, I actually did end up getting a Dreamcast. because after that point, a lot of stores had already stopped carrying Dreamcast stuff as it had been discontinued by Sega, and there were just a few that had like some leftover stuff they were kind of keeping around. And I remember one store, I don't remember if it was a Babbage's or it's no longer there at the mall. Now it's like a kids' play area, but it was in like the food court of the mall where I went down, and they had Dreamcast, consoles dirt cheap, and they're basically giving away VMUs, and the games were all like marked down to like almost nothing, and they just had part of a shelf in one of those little like middle store displays, not even on the wall, where like one half was I think like Game Boy Color or something ridiculous, and the other half was just random Dreamcast games that were left over and some used controllers. And I was like, I could go in there, and I actually went in there looking for PS2 stuff, and I saw all that, and I was like, man, I could get a whole new console and a memory card and some games and everything for what I was going to just get a couple PS2 games for. So I ended up getting a Dreamcast, and it was the same experience all over again, really, of the NES and the Genesis, where until just a couple of years ago, the only Dreamcast stuff I had was whatever I got that day. That was it. And the only other time I experienced games was my friend Matt had a Dreamcast and a few different games that I didn't have. He like the Sword of Berserk, the Guts Rage. I didn't have that originally. Played that at my friend Matt's house. We both had, I think, Sonic Adventure. I really got into Shenmue and loved it, but that was sort of the end of the Dreamcast for me. That's all there was, where I love the Dreamcast. Cosmetically, the console and the controller were automatically my favorite of all time. They still are, and I loved my experiences on the system, but again, those experiences were limited to that one stack of games that I had, so it didn't get a lot of playtime for me. Once I eventually got, about a year later, getting into like 2003, I think summer 2003, ended up getting a GameCube and getting a handful of games there. The GameCube, again, fell against, like, sort of like the Dreamcast or the fate of against the PS2, where there were some great GameCube games that I liked, but for every GameCube game that came out, there were 10 great PS2 games. PS2 just like flooded the market constantly. So I really enjoyed the GameCube, but just kept buying PS2 stuff, and I actually didn't want an original Xbox. I was very against getting one. It seemed kind of cool, like it had some cool games, but seemed like such like a bro system. Like if you don't like first-person shooters and sports games, it wasn't for you, and that's only true to a point. Like really, there are a lot of fantastic games in just about every genre on the original Xbox. Definitely not one of my favorite systems of all time, but there's stuff that goes against the reputation that it has, especially at that time, from a lot of the anti-Xbox, you could say like otaku crowd in a way, like no, it's not Japanese, it's not good. It is good, but it's still not one of my favorites. And we played a lot of Halo and things. A lot of people had an Xbox, and I just never really got into it. But one day I walked into a game store, and I was looking to see, if there's any kind of cool GameCube stuff that I wanted, or PS2. I think it was, I'm trying to remember what I saw first. But I was like I looked at something on the Xbox shelf that I was like, oh, what's this? It's kind of interesting, just kind of as a curiosity, not thinking about getting it. And then I saw it, Shenmue 2 with the Shenmue the movie right over here. Like this is what it was. Like it was one of those where it wasn't sitting like this. It was sitting like this on the shelf, and I saw Shenmue 2 and I was like, what is this? Because at the time I really didn't have any gaming magazines anymore. I had an old subscription to like official PlayStation magazine. That was it. Wasn't really getting into any kind of online stuff for gaming, so I really wasn't getting a lot of gaming news. It was back in the days of just kind of what you see walking into the store. So having gotten a Dreamcast after the Dreamcast died and being limited to the experiences of those handful of games, I never knew Shenmue 2 even existed at the time. I had no idea. I knew Dreamcast was dead. I knew I loved Shenmue. And I thought that was it. I thought it died after the first Shenmue, because, when I got it, it seemed fairly new, and Dreamcast was already dead. It just seemed, reasonable to me. It wasn't that far off. I mean, it died after Shenmue 2. But I never knew this existed. We never got it in the States. People were importing the PAL version. And I was like, holy crap. I forgot about, I actually had, I think, GameCube and PS2 games in my hand, like a stack of used games. And I just went around the store putting them back, trying to make sure I put them back correctly, and went back over to the Xbox case and just grabbed Shenmue 2 and walked over and said, do you have an Xbox for sale? And that's what I did. That's how I got my Xbox, was I bought Shenmue 2 and an Xbox, and from there I ended up getting some other things like Panzer Dragoon, Orta, and of course the first two Halo games and stuff like that, just, Morrowind. But this is the entire reason why I owned an Xbox originally. That was solely, like, I didn't even care if this was the only thing I got. Shenmue was incredible. To this day is one of my favorite games. I was like, Shenmue 2, holy crap. And I just had to have it. So that's how I got my Xbox. And that ended up being, for me, my favorite generation, Gen 6. Gen 5 would be very, very close behind, and I definitely like some Gen 4 stuff. But that generation is where the core of my collection is, just because I just got so much love from those systems, and it was such a period in my life where that was the time where I had the most sort of free time to game, plus the most income compared to expenses. Being in high school, you don't really have a lot of bills. I was working pretty decent hours, and I really didn't have a lot of hobbies outside of that. Like, I like to read and write, and that's cheap hobbies. I ran track and field. That's a cheap sport. Just buy spikes and shorts, and you're good. And so a lot of my money just went towards gaming, and that was just sort of the time where I also lived down the street from a few friends, and it was something where gaming was a way of getting together, and that was the main thing. That was like a social activity for me, and at the same time you had those great, wonderful experiences of RPGs going on, and that just, for me, even though there are some amazing classics from older generations and some good stuff from newer, that for me just kind of became my favorite of all time. That generation, those four consoles together as a whole, was just a very exciting time for me as a gamer, and really turned me into what I love. And it was a great way of getting into my other passions, reading a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, watching a lot of anime, getting into a lot of Asian material for the first time, hosting exchange students from Japan and getting to go over there. My friend Matt and I went through a program and got to stay and amazingly hang out with the students that had stayed with me, so building a great relationship with them. And a lifelong friend, especially, and my friend Hiroki, someone who I still kind of contact with. I wish I could talk a little bit more and be able to actually go over and see those guys again, Tomo and Masa. That'd be great, but it was just a very defining point in my life that really helped transform what I was going to be as an adult, what I was going to enjoy as an adult, outside of gaming too. But from then on, that's kind of where I stopped. From that point, went on to college. I ended up moving to Florida. I ended up coming back to Pennsylvania, where I'm at right now, and just kind of going all over the place. And it really didn't leave a lot of time for gaming. And I really only started getting back into gaming maybe 5 years ago, I'd say at most, and really collecting again. And it really hasn't been... I still am much more of Gen 4, 5, and 6 gaming, and at this point, I enjoy some Gen 7 stuff. I definitely got into the Wii more than anything, strangely. I have an interesting story where I don't have a PS3 right now, and I will have a PS3 with games, but I did have a PS3 and got rid of it out of anger. And that sort of encompassed my whole opinion of Gen 7, where I waited a while to get into that gen because I was still collecting 4, 5, and 6, Gen 4, 5, and 6 stuff, especially a lot of PS1 and 2 games. And I got a PS3, got a handful of games, and every single one of them genuinely enraged me. I was just so disgusted with myself for spending this money. And looking back, I didn't have very many games for it, and I really regret getting rid of it and not getting into the games that I will love for the system, the games that I've played and looked through, and the later Yakuza games. A lot of the games that I like for that generation didn't start coming out till later, like the Persona 4 Arena games and Persona 5's coming out. And it was sort of, at the time when I got it, I got things I was familiar with, or things that I really thought just on sight were going to be good, and it infuriated me. Playing Final Fantasy 13, love it or hate it, I personally hated it. I thought it was terrible, and I was so angry. I was like, this is really bad. This is Final Fantasy, and that was ugh, it was awful. And then I was like, alright, so I got rid of that. I played Final Fantasy X-2, and I didn't even finish X-2 because I was like, this isn't a whole lot better. It's definitely better, but I just didn't like it. And I played a couple other games. The one that really solidified my just like hatred for that gen for a little while, and I've kind of gotten over that. And there are some good PS3 games, there are some good Xbox 360 games, but in comparison, like the two of those together, my library is going to be smaller than any single Gen 4, 5, or 6 system by a lot. But it just was Asura's Wrath. And Asura's Wrath was a very kind of cool experience, but it really was more of a watch rather than play, which I can be okay with. Like I can get through that, but it felt like it should have been more play. It should have been longer. It didn't have substance. It was a lot of flash without substance. And I think that's what that gen mostly is, are those hidden gems from that generation, but as a whole, that generation of consoles was mostly just flash with no substance. And beating the game and finding out like, oh, this ending was terrible, and finding out you had to go and purchase and download the actual ending to the game, I just lost it there. I'm like, are you kidding me? I spent money on this game and I have to download the ending. I was done. I said, forget it. And I got rid of it. And I ended up getting a Wii just because I wanted a console from that generation. Even though I was kind of ticked at that entire generation, especially at that point, the Wii was fairly cheap. There were some just kind of good old-fashioned, just like fun games on there. Things like even stuff like the Wii Sports Resort and things like that. Some of the Mario and Sonic at the Olympics, like that kind of stuff, like Boom Blocks. And I just kind of wanted some fun, lighthearted stuff. And I ended up really falling in love with the Wii and actually liking it better than PS3 or 360, even having experienced those systems a lot, because there's more crap to sort of wade through on the Wii, but the gems that you get from getting through all those crappy titles are better, I feel, than the gems you get from the PS3 and 360. It's definitely one of those things where you have to work harder to get a really cool Wii collection, but in the end it pays off better. I really just, nothing that generation compared to something like Xenoblade Chronicles for me. I love The Last Story. The Wii surprisingly has probably one of the best arcade-style light gun shooter libraries ever. Like, it honestly compares with something like the Saturn or the PS2. I mean, it's a great collection of games in that genre. A lot of arcadey fun that has been slowly dying off since the Dreamcast made its way onto the Wii, and is now, I think, continuing a little bit into the Wii U. Not quite as much, but the Wii U is very awesome. But for me, that's kind of where it brought me to. And at this point, I have a big part. I have probably roughly almost half, a little less than half of my North American sort of like wish list complete, and just a small chunk so far of my Japanese only wish list. And I've gotten really into getting into a lot of more obscure Japan-only systems, like PC Engine stuff, like CD things, PCFX, a lot of Dreamcast imports, PS2, definitely things like the Wonder Swan Color, Bandai Palladium, FM Towns Marty. That kind of stuff is really fascinating me, and really I'm getting into more of just gaming for what I really love, and getting into collecting more than just kind of playing games. And really, one of the systems that has been driving that for me lately has been the Sega Saturn, something that I've completely missed out on. I actually just got one for the first time this December, around this Christmas, was the first time I ever had a Saturn, and I've fallen in love with it. And I'm really getting to a point now where I've really almost defined what I love and who I am as a gamer, and what I'm going to continue to collect. And that gets me to the point of this summer I'm going to be doing a Summer of Sega. And the reason why is because now that like I said, all my experiences with Sega are very limited, and I wish I'd grown up more with it. I'm really loving the Genesis, getting into things like the Sega CD. I'm loving the Saturn. The Saturn's a great system, very underrated, getting a lot of Japan exclusives for that. The Dreamcast is quickly becoming one of my favorite systems ever. A lot of great Japan exclusive stuff for that too, and just really, I'm really getting more into Sega more than anything right now, and even like NEC a little bit, but like Sega, and I feel like this is sort of the perfect time for me to sort of show not just the type of games that I love, but the growth from what I started out as a gamer into what I'm becoming as a gamer through Sega more than anything, because that's what I'm experiencing sort of live for you guys. That's the, I have tons of experience with Nintendo stuff and tons of experience with Sony and, Microsoft and a lot of the other companies. But Sega's the one I never had a lot of experience from, so you can actually, now I feel like through my channel, talking about stuff for other systems obviously, but doing a lot of Sega stuff over the summer and throughout the year, because that's something where I can show you a lot of first-hand experience for me, things that I've never seen before or played before, or showing off things that I'm very passionate about, and it's kind of a window into, even talking about a lot of the Dreamcast stuff, shows you a bit of a reflection of a lot of the PlayStation stuff I like. So I'm really going to use Sega a lot as a very, just like a focal point to use for this channel as far as the gaming aspect in the future. And that is just kind of a, very long-winded episode. I'm sorry about that, but there's really no kind of quick way to go through that many years of gaming. And if you have any questions, or there's anything that you want to know in more detail, because obviously I can't go through, close to 30 years of life in gaming in a half-hour video. Just let me know below, and let me know some of your experiences and what kind of made you a gamer. What are some of your favorite consoles? Yeah, just let me know below, and I'll eventually do a response video to that, any questions that I receive, go into a little more detail, but that's sort of just a basic overview of my history as a gamer and what made me the gamer that I am today.